Zac Goldsmith, one of the front runners in the mayoral election. Thanks for coming to speak to us about your plans for transport, really, as opposed to just cycling in London. We can see around us the challenging environment, and I think we both know that if we're going to get new people cycling, not the hardy few already do, but new people, normal clothes, riding to workplaces and schools en masse, then they won't do that unless they feel safe. So what are your commitments to making a safe space for people to use bikes to get around?
And it's not just, I agree with the premise of what you're saying, obviously, but it's not just about safety, it's also about air. There are a lot of people who choose not to cycle because they just feel that London is too polluted. So the two, I think, go hand in hand. We have seen a big ramp up in cycling under Boris Johnson. I think he's been one of the most pro-cycling politicians we've ever had, and I think you paid tribute to him for that. He's committed to significant funds. I've committed, if elected, to continuing that programme, at least the same amount of money, right until the end of that programme, until the end of this mayoral term. And that will be spent in a number of ways. Partly it's about segregation, it's about the cycle lanes, and part of that is cycle superhighways. But it is also about untangling difficult junctions, areas which are particularly dangerous. That is a big part of it. But outside of that budget, there are things that we can do which would also make a difference. So I've been talking to haulage firms and truck companies about how we can get more trucks off the road. It is crazy that people are competing with heavy goods vehicles at rush hour. This just makes no sense at all. They're chucking out pollution, they're grinding London to a standstill, and they're incredibly dangerous. And we have the means to massively reduce the number of trucks on the road, using consolidation centres which can be mandated from the centre, and I will if I'm elected on May the 5th, using river first policy, rail first policy. There is a lot we can do to deal with congestion, clean up our air and make our roads safer for people who cycle.
So all of these things, if you mentioned you would keep at least the same level of funding, it's an awful lot of money. I mean, in London more is spent than the rest of the country put together, I think. Where's that money going to come from?
So I have to make a political point here. I know you're not a political organisation, but it's why I've committed to protecting the transport budget. If we don't protect the transport budget, we can't do any of the things we want to do. And it's why my main opponent in this contest, whose flagship policy involves taking nearly £2 billion out of the budget, I think would be catastrophic. £2 billion. That means every single aspect of TfL's programme is going to be trimmed at least, or dropped, whether that's the tube upgrades, which are as important for cycling as segregated roads. We need to provide as many alternatives to people using cars as possible, whether it's a night tube, whether it's growing the transport network for cyclists. So I've resisted making brash promises around fares because I know that budget needs to be protected. And it's because I'm protecting that budget that I can commit to continuing the programme that we have had under Boris Johnson. And I hope we can even ramp it up, because there is fat in the system, there is no doubt about that. And I believe that I'm in a good position to get new powers from government so we can be even more bullish about how we grow the transport network. But the minimum that I can promise is that I'll continue with what Boris has done, because that is a promise I know I can keep.
Well, a lot of the things that Boris has done, and we've seen it, and it's been topical just lately, has caused short-term disruption and feelings run high. Culture change is always slow and it's always painful. Would you have the political will, the courage to actually see us past those difficult rough spots for the reward on the other side?
I'm a localist, so I will always try my hardest to work with communities, with local businesses, with residents, to ensure that they're part of a process. I think when you do development to a community, it puts their shackles up. You work with the community, you get the right outcome, almost always. But the community is not always right. I mean, Vauxhall Bridge cycle lane is a good example of something that was bitterly opposed, but which is now, I think, broadly very popular, and it works. So the fears people had were not borne out. But I think there is a case to be made where there is a particularly controversial scheme that's being proposed of using temporary planters. Put them down for a year or a few months to see how it works, see whether or not people's concerns about that scheme are based on any kind of reality. If they're not, then you do it properly. If they are, then you think again. And I think that will reassure communities that it's not panic stations whenever you come up with a new idea. The other thing I'd say is that I went to a public meeting recently organised by people who are overwhelmingly hostile to CS11 Camden, and I asked the audience whether they were implacably opposed to it or whether they thought they would be able to work with TfL to improve the scheme. And only 1 or 2 hands out of hundreds of people went up saying they were implacably opposed to it. There is an overwhelming recognition among communities that we need to make, it's not a question of if we make cycling easier and safer, it's a question of how we do it. And I think the more you involve the community, the more likely it is to avoid the fallout that we've seen in recent years. But ultimately, I am committed to ensuring that cycling can double, as we expect it to, and that it is safer, and that more people, not just professionals, but mums and kids and fathers taking their kids to work, recreational cyclists. I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that it is easier and safer and healthier, and that means tackling the pollution that takes 10,000 lives every single year in London.
Zac Goldsmith,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.